Now, what was your impression when you first walked onto the site? Really visions of Dante's Inferno and hell and just, the terrible destruction which was still completely fresh. What was your impression as you looked at this with a photographer's eye, but also with a New Yorker's heart?
I remember it clearly. It's as any first of anything sticks with you. I found that hard hat, I put it on, I walked about no more than 30 feet, I would say, and I was confronted by the North Tower remains. Steaming, smoking, water being shot into it. And I remember standing in front of it, and I had this kind of quaking in my stomach. I started to feel, not faint, but weak and shaky. And I sat down. There was a beam, a gigantic beam, just like the last column, that scale beam. And I sat down on it, and it was hot. From the heat coming up through the ground, it was hot to the touch. And I didn't matter. I had on a heavy coat, and I sat on it there, and I just wept. I sat in front of that pile, shaking and weeping and wondering, why am I here? What have I done? What's expected of me? What can I offer? I mean, overwhelmed by the spectacle and feeling diminished and, really insufficient in some way.
Is that a feeling you need to overcome to make the photographs you start making at that point? Or is the photography you're doing somewhere out of that feeling?
The second. What happened for me was one of those transformations that one hopes to meet in any situation. It's like falling in love, I felt that I could work with that, from that I was that moved that it wasn't about my eye and shaping and framing a nice-looking photograph, but it was to work with my visceral connections, so that when I felt something, that's when I would make a photograph, rather than just eyeball it and give it some shape and everything. This was not something to be an aesthetic recognition of. It was about the connective sensation that makes you and the event align itself in some way that it goes in deeply. And if these pictures have any resonance, it's because they demanded to be made. And whatever emotion or beauty are, come from the photographs, come because that's how it was when I was there.
Let's come to this idea of beauty, because it seems very incongruous, to say the least, to think of beauty in a scene like this, of such destruction, surrounded by death, even the stench of it, as you mentioned before. That's an uncomfortable connection. And yet, you're a photographer. You don't go there to take bad pictures. You can only take the pictures you think are best in a given moment. Is there a tension in that for you, the recognition that amidst all of this horror, somehow your job is to identify an essential moment that may have profound elements of beauty to it?
It was in the balance of things. It was a big question, because the temptation to make beauty is part of the photographic enterprise. One adjusts and finds the core of your own sense of what is the beautiful in the world. So to be in this 16-acre space in which huge forces had brought down the towers, the forces of gravity and nature after the act of man, and to see everything distributed the way it was everywhere, created a landscape of such phenomenal proportions, of such unexpected intricacy, that a new kind of beauty was visible. And not just to me. Ordinary iron workers and construction workers and truck drivers all had the same sense of awe. All around the site, were thousands of chairs that had flown out of the buildings. And these chairs made a kind of bleachers around the site. And workers who were in there 4 hours at a time would come out and retreat to the bleachers, which were really, let's say, on West Street and Liberty Street and Church Street, all the way around. And they'd sit there with a sandwich or a drink, and they'd just stare at the pile, because the activity on it was continuing, even when they retreated. It was that much of a visual magnet. You could never stop looking at it because it was transforming itself every single day. All of the ants were crawling over the pile, pulling it apart, retrieving the useful, throwing away the detritus. It was a constant change. So I think the properties inherent in the place itself, surrounded by the backdrop of Lower Manhattan that was still intact, made for a kind of urban sublime that was, I think, continuous with the great American tradition of romantic painting, the Hudson River School, the great paintings of the West. These are part of history, and this too follows in that sort of modern image of it.